Oh, Greg's here. We can start. Been waiting on Greg. So last week I spoke out of turn. We are not done with 1 Corinthians. We got a couple more lessons that I wanted to cover. So we're in chapter 16, verses 1 and 2, concerning the collection. So among a lot of congregations, people are surprised that we're passing a plate for collection. I had a delivery guy bringing a shed to my house today, and he was asking about how the church dealt with COVID, and he and his family are very involved in a church down in Sullivan, and he was talking about the fact that their giving was horrible ever since COVID, and that although they still have their people, they don't have any money, and so tonight is not about, okay, so all my years in the church, everyone likes to say, well, you can give your time. True that. Or you can give your talents. Also true, but both of those are expected regardless. But the New Testament also, God demands from the very beginning, He demands monetary giving as well. He always has. So I want to look at a couple things here first. Let's look, because we know the Old Testament is given to us for why? It is a tutor, schoolmaster in the King James. So let's look at what the Jews did. If there's a lesson there, let's look at what they did. Now again, we are not commanded at the same level they are, but again, it's a tutelage. So first, they were expected to do a first tithe. It is 1/10 of everything they produce of new. So if they had 100 new lambs, 10% of them would either be given to the temple or the value of them. And this was to support the priesthood. Then there was a festival tithe, another 10%, second tithe of the year. It was used to pay for all the religious feasts and festivals through the year. So now they're at how much? 20%. Then every third year, they were to give a tithe to the poor. Now, the question is, and we don't know, is this in place of the festival tithe, or is this in addition to? If it is, every third year, there would be a 30% year that you would give. On top of that, there were the offerings. There were the offerings meant to atone for sin. Now, these were not big-ticket items. These might be turtle doves if you were very poor, or it might be a bull if you were wealthy. But it was in relationship to your ability to give. That's an important thing to remember. In relation to your ability to give. Then there was a guilt offering. I guess that was if you sinned, but you didn't want to tell anybody you sinned, so you're feeling guilty. You could do the guilt offering and not tell what you'd done. But money and or rams were used for this offering. Actually, it was to pay restitution to the person you had sinned against, or that you had injured, or whatever, that you killed accidentally. You had to do a restitution. And then the dedications. There were burnt offerings that were due different times of the years. You would have to buy the animal for that, again in correlation to what you could give. There was a cereal offering. No, not Cheerios. But flour, wafers, unleavened bread, cakes. They were given, it really doesn't say the purpose, but why do you think, what would be the purpose of giving cereal offering?
For the poor, perhaps.
Perhaps. Or for the priesthood, because again, the only money they got was the offerings. And so, if we remember burnt offerings, they kept a portion for their own food. And the cereal offering, I think, was probably the same. And then a drink offering. Again, I think the same. The wine for the priesthood, but also for festivals. Some festivals you drank more wine than others. Some of them you drank wine mixed with water. Some of them you drank pure, just straight wine. And again, the wine in those days was a less alcoholic than it is now, but it was still alcoholic. I read a thing one day talking about I think it's Festival of the Booths. in which they would go out and stay in a tent. And apparently, that got a little raucous. That festival was a little wild. But anyway, so that's, oh, I'm sorry. Then there were peace offerings and votive offerings. The votive is about a vow, and then at the end of the vow or the beginning of the vow, you would make an offering to ask God to bless it. Peace offering, animals of any kind, unleavened cakes were given. Now that's the end of it. So, verses 1 and 2 there. Someone read that for us. All right, fine. Now, concerning the collection for the saints. See, whenever we do a class on collection, nobody talks. Oh, we talk about somebody else's sin. Y'all got a lot to say. Anyway, concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you are to do as well. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper, so that no collections need to be made when I come. All right, so the early church is known for its love for each other. And one way they showed that was through giving to others, ensuring, charity of its members. One thing the elders talked about just recently was that there is a trend right now in Freeport, and I get these phone calls on a regular basis, at least one a day, in which people don't ask for, in fact, somebody did today. They said, can I come tomorrow and get food? Sure. 6:15. Oh, that's not very convenient. Well, that's when we'll be there. You can come at 6:15. We will load you up on groceries. Or we have people call and say, will you give me money? Nope. But we will give you food. Well, that doesn't help me pay my bills. Well, it does, because you don't have to buy groceries. And you can use that money you would have put it for groceries into paying your bill. And I had a person not too long ago that called me every day. I blocked his number, so he got a different number. And he would rant and rave when I told him no, and call me a racist and all these things because I refused to pay. And here's the thing, what I didn't want to pay was months worth of bills. Not I'm behind this month, they might shut me up. I'm behind 6 months, we hear. 3 months, 6 months, whatever. And so that I have an issue with. And so the discussion the elders had was, we will give every extra penny we can give to support a member of the body. That is our first and foremost duty, to protect our own. I'll use Don as an example. He may be out of work a long time. We may need to help them to survive. And so that is our first thing. We still need to give to others, but what verse did God use about working and giving?
2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10.
If a man
Will not work. It doesn't say cannot. It says will not work, neither should he.
Right. So there's a responsibility on them as well as us. This love went beyond the local congregation, which we have always been very good about in, for instance, helping in Haiti. This TV drives me crazy because it cuts off my last verse. But anyway, they were collecting for the saints in Judea. Now, at that time, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them was named Agabus. He stood up and indicated by the Spirit that there would be definitely a severe famine all over the world. And this took place in the reign of Claudius. And to the extent that any of the disciples had means, each of them determined to send a contribution for the relief of the brothers and sisters living in Judea. And they did this, sending it with Barnabas and Saul to the elders. So the example, when we have a congregation in need, some way, just last year I made a commitment with a congregation that is building a building. And they said, we just don't have the funds, but we are growing. And so they asked every congregation, they were really smart. They said, rather than a dollar amount, would you commit to a small amount once a year for the next 5 years? It's a good idea. So, we're going to give them $100 or so a year. That was one of their suggested amounts. Churches are more open to something like that. That's a doable amount, and do it annually. I said, remind me, because I will never remember when I promised this. The churches in Greece took up a collection for the saints in Jerusalem. Now, this is interesting, because what would be the mindset between the churches in Greece and the church in Jerusalem? Do you see a problem that could be there?
That's the home base, Jerusalem.
In a way. How?
Well, the Jews would not even have associated with them, and so they would look at this and say, these people won't even talk to us.
But instead, they said, these are our brethren. Doesn't matter. And so we need to remember our giving, our helping, our doing is not dependent on how someone sees me or how I see them. Obviously, we should see everyone as children of God. But it is not dependent on how you've treated me or I've treated you. It is dependent on what does God tell us to do for other people. So a systematic collection was established. Paul gave instructions, we know, to the churches in Galatia and Corinth. Now, one of the things we need to always remember is, did Paul only write the Pauline epistles that we have? I can't answer it 100%, but it's doubtful. I would say there were a number of other epistles, and the reason they weren't canonized, well, I know there were some others that were not canonized. What would be the reason you would not canonize them and put them in our Bibles?
Had some error in
There could be statements that they couldn't reconcile, yes, with other, because remember, they used a 2- and 3-tier system.
It could already be covered in other epistles.
Could be repetitive.
There's no new information.
Yeah, if there was nothing new, there was no reason to canonize it and be so repetitive in the New Testament. So we do know at least 2 of the churches were told about giving. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches in Galatia, so you are to do as well. In verse 2 there, talks about a weekly, on the first day of every week, each of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper, so no collections need to be made when I come. So, systemic giving, a system of giving. Kayla does budgeting and stuff for the schools. The school needs to know what they're going to spend. Needs to know what's coming in. I mean, we see Aquin saying they're probably going to have to close. Why? They know what's been coming in, they know what goes out, and they know that the trend is there's not enough coming in. And so God is saying, I want you to plan and purpose. Why do you think the command was weekly? And there's 2 or 3 reasons there why it'd be weekly, but what do you think?
One would be, on your mind at least, it wouldn't be something, we're gonna drop everything once a year and do it. It's something, as you go, you plan.
How many of us would save up all of our giving for a year and have it at the end of the year? Because there's some years that, boy, it's just nip and tuck, right? So, yeah, if you do it weekly, it's manageable. It's manageable. And so, I mean, God is a reasonable God, and God is God that understands human nature. And saying do it once a year. Now, that's what the Jews were told to do, was once a year. Yes, Steve?
Well, I think that kind of goes back to federal income tax in a way. Maybe that principle. They'll take a little bit out every week or every month, rather than having to write a big check at the end of the year. I wasn't around when they decided that, but
Well, I will tell you, as a what am I? I'm a contract employee. Because of that, I'm responsible for my own taxes, and I have to do it quarterly. It takes a bite. So Julie saves it for me. Holds it back and then writes me a check every quarter. But see, that was a doable solution, and it's the same principle here. Set it aside. Plan for it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It also coincided with the worship on the first day of the week.
Yes.
You know, it was a convenience of nothing else. You did the communion on the first day of the week, you worshiped on the first day of the week. Why not, you know, put aside what you're gonna give on the first day? Makes sense.
Yeah, in fact, one of the non-apostolic writers, one of the elders of the church, in the first century, maybe early second century, as he was describing how Christians worship to the emperor, what he said was, we come together, we sing some hymns of praise, we pray for the brethren. The president of the assembly, which is just how what they call the preacher in those days, or one of the elders, will get up and will discuss scripture with us. We take the Lord's Supper. We sing a hymn. It says, and then there is a giving for the needs of the church. So even back then, although they didn't put them one after the other like we do, they're still right there together. So yeah. And I'll just ask a side question while we're thinking about it. So Allison, for years, they put money aside, and now she's getting her retirement. Should she have given that money that she didn't have in hand then? Or is it okay that she does it now?
If you don't have it, it's hard to give it.
And again, the answer to that is as you prosper. So that money she was prospering, but not until she reached a certain age. Fine.
Yeah, I used to think about, should I contribute, lay aside on my gross pay or my net pay? So,
Again,
that's where it's at.
so I guess we'll get to the end of the lesson then, the lesson now. The bottom line is, what does your conscience tell you to do? Tom McBrayer, a good friend of mine in the military, member of the church, his father was a stickler and gave 50% of everything the family made. Tom always resented that because the family, because of that 50% giving, was poor. And they did without. He always resented it. He always said it was too much. But yet Tom was still one of the best givers we had in the church. Because he learned that lesson still, and he gave way more than 10%. As he would be talking about how horrible his father was for giving so much that it cost the family. And God didn't intend that. God does not intend us to bankrupt our family for the sake of giving. And we know that because we know that a man's responsibility is to care for his family. Right? That is one of our duties. Okay. So the purpose of the collection. One, to provide for needy Christians. 1 Corinthians 18:1 says it was a collection for the saints. Romans 15:26, it was for the poor among the saints in Macedonia and Achaia. It was for the poor among the saints which Macedonia and Achaia sent the money to Jerusalem. It concerned ministering to the saints, 2 Corinthians 9:1. Supplying the needs of the saints, 2 Corinthians 9:12. So it was purpose given for the saints, but was it only for the local church? No. It's locally and abroad. Again, as we see, the church of Jerusalem cared for its own, but the churches in Antioch, Macedonia, Achaia, and Galatia cared for those in Jerusalem and Judea when the need arose. So when Jerusalem could care for its own, prior to AD 70, they took care of them. After the siege, then the other churches had to help them because they had no income there for 3 years. So they had to help them. And it does include preachers. We had a member here a long time ago, back when we lived here in the 80s, 90s, whatever, who told me one time, and I was obviously not the preacher then, told me that time, he said, I just don't think we should have a located preacher that gets paid to do this. And I said, but how does the work get done? It's up to the members to do it, to get there, you should come from work straight here, do stuff. Okay, that's not always practical either. Right, wrong, or indifferent, churches have a better standing in the community when they have a located trust. Now, especially among the African American congregations or churches here in town, many of them don't have a full-time minister. There's not the money. And oftentimes, people will look at that and say that they just, I don't want to be there. Why? Because I don't know if they're strong enough. I don't know if, and they will go to the ones that, I have a number of friends in the community that minister said, go to those churches. Because it just feels more, what's the word I want? Substantial, I guess. Huh?
Solid.
Solid, yeah. They feel better about supporting it as well. Which is interesting too, because I got a call one time from someone that just asked the question, so do you own that church? What? No, God, he's not. No. And they said, well, there are some churches in our community where the pastor owns the church. So all the money goes to him, and we didn't know where any of the money was going. And he didn't tell. And no. I'm just an employee. Christ owns the church. They overfund the church. They deal with the money. I said, I'm an elder, but I don't touch the money. They do. So,
He's saying that, want to know who, built.
there is within many communities a portion of churches that are actually, the building has been bought by the preacher. They own the property, they own the building, and the money is theirs, it comes in. Yeah. So anyway, so we see that Paul received support from various churches, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, so the inference is that it came from the church treasury, from the weekly giving of the church. And this is a note from a book I was reading. It said, if someone is spending full-time service in service for the Lord, they will qualify as needy saints. Well, the idea is, because they have no other income, then it's a need. It's a need for the congregation to fulfill. Okay, so, the blessings of giving. First off, Acts 20, verse 35. You've all heard this. It is more blessed to give than to receive. When you're 8 years old at Christmas, you just don't believe that first. But Paul said that everything I showed you, that by working hard in this way, you must help the weak and remember the words of Jesus himself, is more blessed to give than to receive. So, is there a blessing in giving to others? Well, there's multiple blessings. One, those of you who've been to Haiti with me and seen what our money did there and think the works that were happening, did you feel blessed by that? Absolutely. It really bothered me when churches would drop Lutheran's support because they said, he didn't provide enough updates and budgeting statements and all this stuff. You've got to go to Haiti to understand it. That's not going to happen. Whites Ferry Road, who's supporting a lot, said, we want receipts for everything you buy. Well, I was there a lot, and the only receipts I ever got was when I insisted somebody write one on a piece of paper for me, and that's about worthless. It doesn't work that way. When you buy your food on a street corner, and when you buy your building supplies in front of a shop, and it's not a real hardware store. But if you go and you see him work, then you realize that he is not cheating anybody. So, to me, that says that the idea, if an eldership's going to give, then they need to research. They don't just need to make decisions from afar. Either you support it and go check on it, or you don't support it. You don't ever start. And I say this because, for those who are aware of it, there was a movement within the Church of Christ called the Boston Movement. Kim McKean did that. Nikolai, who worshiped with us, was a member of a Boston Movement congregation. But Nikolai came just really upset one day. He came from the hospital here. He said he had to talk to me and pray with me. I said, okay, what's wrong? The Boston Movement itself had some internal strife. They split, and they husband and wife, little kids, because typically missionaries are young families. And now they're stuck in whatever third world country with no support, no future support coming, no opportunity to raise more support. That's just horrible to me. So, givers are blessed. Cheerful givers are blessed bountifully. So the second on that is one that feels good to help, especially those in need. But there is also a promise that God will bless us back. And while I don't believe we should expect financial blessings in return, there is a principle that says we will get some financial blessings in return. God will provide for his people. Yes.
You know, Jeff, I think that sometimes that our society, Americanism, gets into this. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you shouldn't give financially. However, when you look at this, this was to take care of the needs of the church. They were making this collection. They would have been just as happy with a cow or some vegetables or whatever. And so when we say there are other ways to give, there are. If the church is supporting the food, then you don't necessarily, if you gave a cow or you gave some meat or you gave a vegetable, you're doing the work.
That is, okay, so yes, that is still a financial gift.
Right.
Because there is value to those things. And some of the money we were giving every month would go into buying bags of rice and beans that would be handed out to the local preachers on Saturday when they came in. And about a week's worth of rice and beans would be given to their family. Luther said, I don't give it any more than that because I want them to do what? Keep coming to learn. And he said, so if I give them a week, they come back. Now the other part of our money paid for their bus ride into the city and back home. When we would bring them in from the field for like one of the training sessions I did with them, we would not only pay for their bus, we would feed them for that week. You know, they'd sleep on the floor in the school, but we would feed them. And that's because they were not able to work at all for that week. You know, they were here. So giving food and stuff, that's still a financial gift. When I said too often people want to say, I don't have the money to give anything, but I will clean the building. And I will tell you, the people that are proponents of that, I don't very often see in the building painting and cleaning and doing manual labor. So it's easy to say that I will do that, and that's fine. Greg is the exclusion. Greg's here as often as I am for a while there. But no, there is a time and place for that. But for the majority of people, it's an excuse. It is not a reality. Back in about 87, 88, our church in Conyers, Georgia, it was one of the fastest growing communities in the state of Georgia. And we were getting a lot of people moving in. We were getting doctors, and we were getting lawyers. I mean, we were getting everyday, blue collar too, but we were getting money influx. But our budget wasn't going up. Our treasury wasn't going up. So one of our men, who was a career Navy, he was a submarine captain, and he was a money guy. And the preacher said, I don't want to preach this Sunday. And he said, I will. And I'll never forget, because he got up, he talked about these verses we're talking about, and he said, now let's get down to brass tacks. And he pulled up some pie charts, and he showed what the average giving was per family, and it was about $5 a week. And he said, some of you people are making $5,000 a week. Where's that money? He said, others of you are blue-collar workers, but we know you're making more than $5, a week. And he made a good point, and the giving did go up. A little harsh, and I wouldn't have done it that way, because that might be one of those,
Exit sermon?
yeah, what's that called? Elite, no, I don't know. Anyway, no, a very moving sermon. You preach it, you're moving the next week. So, but, he made a good point. Okay, so cheerful givers who sow bountifully will reap accordingly. The one who sows sparingly will reap sparingly. The one who sows generously will reap generously. This seems to be, to me, a financial incentive. I think that there is a financial component. God is not gonna let you starve to death if you're feeding others, if you're helping others. He says, and why? And this is where the financial component comes in. Why? So that as you reap, you can do more with what you reap. So let's look at the principle of a field of corn. So I'm always amazed, you know, when I was helping groups on a regular basis out there, we would get so many bags of corn seed, and we'd put them and we'd plant them. And that one seed would produce hundreds of seeds. Why? Because you had a couple of years on it, and they were loaded. And so, if we weren't in a day and age when the corn has been so modified that it's sterile, you know, if you would see you'd have that. And if you took and planted everything you harvested this year, except what you need to eat, you would have an even bigger field the next year. So an abundance so you can do even more. As it's written, He scattered abroad, He gave to the poor, His righteousness endures forever. Now He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing, and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in everything for all liberality, which to us is producing thanksgiving to God. So, in the 1800s, one of my grandfathers was a gospel preacher, but he was a farmer. And this was right after the Civil War. The South was very divided. He was a proponent of taking former slaves, teaching them to read the Bible, and to give them churches. You know, because they weren't being accepted in white churches, basically. And so he went on a 3-year mission trip through the South and just left his family behind, and he did not get support from other churches. How did he survive? For one thing, the members of his church planted his crops and harvested his crops. And his family got the food, they came and helped his wife, whatever she needed. It wasn't an influx of money, but they made sure she was making money when he was gone. And he was living on the good wishes of everyone he was trying to teach. He would go stay in homes and all that. So, my uncle told me that story when I was thinking about being a preacher. He said, "Did you want to do this?" Because. So anyway. So the recipients are blessed as well. The needs of the saints have been supplied. They're filled with praise and longing for their brethren. When we do this, Luther says this every time he writes me, and I believe it. He says, we mention your church almost every service, and we pray for you guys. And so people that are being helped, pray for the people that are helping them. But people in Haiti know they can't help themselves. It's even get worse. So they pray and they're thankful when we can help. We didn't have the funds to help the other week. It was wrote and said, I really have this and this. Cholera has been going through our orphanage really bad. So, I just sent him some money from our account. And I said, I want to help you get medical treatment for these orphans. So here is this. And he just thanked me and thanked me and thanked me. Why? Because that's part of his ministry. And those children are part of our ministry. And he was so grateful that we could do that. And so I really appreciate the prayers we get back from that church on our behalf. Because their prayer has as much power as my prayer has. And God hears them. And they are one of the most grateful and praiseful people I've ever met in my life. And they're an inspiration to me, they really are. And God gets blessed. When our liberality abounds, there are many things given to God, 2 Corinthians 9:15. Because people see that and thank God. And it's interesting because, like I said, this guy I was talking to today that delivered my shed, he wanted to talk about church. And he wanted to talk about how good God's been. And, he also told me, he said, I don't want to start something, but, there's rumors that they're going to shut down the state again. said, we won't be shut down again. And I said, that's pretty much where my head is. We won't be shut down again no matter what. And he said, it was horrible. He said, you may not agree, but I think it was Satan. I agree. Satan had a big hand in everything that happened. He said, Satan had been in Max. No, he didn't. But you know, here's a fellow believer. I don't know what his background is. A fellow believer that says, I'm going to serve God no matter what, and disease and whatever, it's not going to stop us. So when? Because if it gives us a guideline to give, and it tells us why, and it tells us the return we get on it, when do we do it? So, on the first day of the week, that's pretty simple. On the first day of the week, each of you is to put aside and say, as you may prosper, so that no collection need to be made when I come. So the question is, and this was asked, and we had a lot of this started during COVID because we weren't coming here. A number of our retirees said, I get my check on this day. When should I give? The first Sunday after that. But we're not coming to the building. You know, I serve a reasonable God. And I know it says on the first day of the week. But at the same time, if we live in a time and environment where it's not possible to do that, and you do the next best thing of some number of our members have said that we get an automatic withdrawal and it comes straight to the church. I'm okay with that. Because why? You have done what with your giving?
They buy in store one thing.
Yes?
Just continue on.
And you purpose in your giving. You plan for your giving. So, I did get a phone call from a company that puts ATMs in church lobbies. I don't know what they do. I said, defeats the idea of planning ahead. You know, yes, we might get more money in the collection, but that kind of defeats the purpose of planning ahead.
I wish the building saw one of those.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
You didn't share with your fellow elders.
I did not ask for permission to say yes on that. I didn't ask you about the new water fountains going in either, but it's going in. So, anyway, why the first day of the week? It's when the disciples were coming together to break bread. It was a convenient time. And this is why I believe the principle is there that if we cannot reasonably give on the first day, then another purpose, convenient time will be acceptable to God. That's my opinion. I am Paul. This is my opinion. This is not a command from the Lord himself. But again, the whole point of this was not to command you to do something, and if you come to church on a Sunday and don't give, you're going to hell. The command was plan and purpose and make allowance for this. Because the giving is the command. The how and when is a suggestion that is reasonable. Greg, could you go ring the bell? Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's 10 after. I changed my contacts and one of them's not doing right.
One was like seven.
One's foggy and the other one's okay. How to give, fortunately, as you prosper, willingly, purposely, cheerfully. Those are how we're expected to feel about it. And how? Well, the Macedonians gave sacrificially. Did they do that every week? Probably not. Why did they give sacrificially in this example? There was a specific need. The saints were starving. They gave sacrificially. And I think if we have somebody in the church family here, or even the whole congregation, if we're starving, then we're going to give a whole lot more. We're going to. So and Bruce and I did a what if one time. Me and him and Roger. And we were talking about what if the wheels fell off the economy and everything. And Bruce said, well, as long as I've got cattle, we're going to eat. Well, that's reasonable. He says we can turn crops into, instead of field corn, into sweet corn. And, we can all work together to make sure we got food. That's doing what's needed when it's needed. The Achaeans had zeal stirred up to give. They were excited about the opportunity to give. And Christ himself, who though rich became poor, that we might be rich. He was willing to give everything so that others could have what they needed. Okay, so, Galatians 3:24, the law was our King James Version, and I think that's the best version of that verse, because we all know what a schoolmaster. But if the Old Testament was given as an example or a teacher, what should our attitude be towards the collecting for the saints? And it should be one that uses the Old Testament as an example and looks